Hello everyone. Today we're going to look at outcomes of the hypothesis test and things that are called type 1 and type 2 errors. So the following are the 4 possible outcomes after making a hypothesis decision. We have 2 actions. We either do not reject the null hypothesis or we reject it. And then we have either the null hypothesis is true or the alternative hypothesis is true. So remember, the alternative hypothesis is the opposite of the null hypothesis, so only one of them can be true. And remember, in general, we don't know which one is true. If we did, we wouldn't have to do a hypothesis test. So if we do not reject the null hypothesis, so we keep the null hypothesis, and it was true, this is considered a correct outcome. If we reject the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis was true, this is the other type of correct outcome. We made the correct decision. Otherwise, we did not make the correct decision and we have an error. If we reject the null hypothesis and it was actually true, this is called a type 1 error. If we do not reject the null hypothesis and the alternative was true, this is considered a type 2 error. So we're going to do some examples of just making sure we understand which type of error is which. And alpha is the probability of a type 1 error. Beta is the probability of a type 2 error. This alpha is the same as the alpha we had in the confidence interval problems. Okay, so it's going to be the probability of a type 1 error, which again is rejecting the null hypothesis when it was actually true. So for our first case, we're going to suppose that the null hypothesis is that a new blood test determines that you have cancer. A type 1 error would be the test says you don't have cancer when you do. A type 2 error says the test says you have cancer when you don't. Which has the greater consequence? Would you rather a test say you don't have cancer when you do, or a test that says you have cancer when you don't? So the greater consequence in this situation is a type 1 error. If you had a type 2 error, so the test says you have cancer when you don't, you will hopefully be getting more tests done, and those further tests will show that the original test was a false positive. Okay, so again, in this case, a type 1 error is the worst error. And that means that we want to make alpha, the probability of this occurring, as small as possible. So in general, we can control alpha just like we did with the confidence intervals. So in a hypothesis test, we can choose what alpha is. We choose the probability of creating a type 1 error. It's harder to control beta, and we're not going to get into that in this course, so we're only going to focus on choosing our alpha. So again, the probability of a type 1 error. So let's try another one. Suppose the null hypothesis is that Frank's rock climbing equipment is considered safe. A type 1 error is that Frank thinks his equipment is unsafe when it really is. And a type 2 error is that Frank thinks his equipment is safe when it really isn't. So again, which one has the greater consequence? Would you rather think your equipment is unsafe when it is safe? Or would you rather think it's safe when it's unsafe? Hopefully we can agree that the type 2 error is the worst one. If you think your equipment's unsafe when it really is, you won't use it. Maybe you'll get it rechecked, maybe you'll throw it out, you might be out some money, but you're not hurt. If you think your equipment is safe when it isn't, that means you're probably going to get hurt. So you really don't want to take that chance. So type 2 error in this case is the worst choice. And then as our last example, suppose the null hypothesis is that a defendant in a murder trial is innocent. Type 1 error is the defendant is found guilty even though they are innocent. And a type 2 error is the defendant is found innocent even though they are guilty. Which has the greater consequence? This one's a little tougher to decide. Okay. Would you rather have an innocent person sent to prison or a murderer set free. So sometimes it's not clear cut which type of error is better or worse than the other ones. A lot of people would say, I don't care about letting a murderer go free. I really don't want an innocent person sent to prison because that's terrible. And then other people would say, well, I don't want a murderer running free. So again, it's kind of a give and take. It's not always clear cut. So just keep that in mind, and then read through the book, try out some of the other problems, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.